Hey, Fearless community, I just want to thank you for listening to Fearless Tips and Talks. I am passionate about helping people overcome fear and anxiety, so much so that I wrote a book about overcoming severe panic and anxiety disorder called Nervous Breakthrough. You can find it on Amazon, or you can order a signed copy with a personal message from me at fearlessunite.com/books. And then you click the Fearless Store button. All of this will be linked in the show notes. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to Resilience in the Pews, a pivotal podcast series that dives deep into the intersection of faith, mental health, and the challenges faced within the sacred walls of our churches. Well, hello, Fearless family. Today, we start a brand new series called Resilience in the Pews, tackling anxiety and church wounds. So the goal of this series is to explore the often overlooked aspects of anxiety, trauma, and emotional wounds that many individuals experience in their church communities. Now, I want to be clear from the top. I want to be very clear from the top. I believe in the local church. And I also believe that the vast majority of American churches need to reimagine or reestablish what the local church should look like in our communities. And you might ask me, well, Christy, what in the world does this series have to do with helping people overcome fear and anxiety in a world that feeds it? Well, I believe that we have a mental health crisis in our world because we have a discipleship crisis in our world. Jesus left his followers with a charge: go and make disciples. A devoted follower of Christ prioritizes Jesus, follows his commands, displays the fruits of the Spirit, expresses love towards everyone, and actively engages in disciple making. And this type of person, this disciple that I just described, is certain to influence this fallen, stressed out, and fearful world, bringing glory to God. Now, will this disciple experience times of fear and anxiety? Yes, of course. But the fruit of their life will overwhelmingly be marked with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Which brings me back to, why are we even doing this podcast series? Well, would the epidemic of fear and anxiety be defeated if our churches would commit as a top priority to making devoted disciples? And I've reflected a lot on this lately, especially when it comes to my leadership and being a part of a ministry that is tackling fear and anxiety since 2016. And my conclusion may shock you. I'm a part of the problem. I've had so many stages of my ministry journey where I cared more about growth, butts in the seats, how many fearless events are we doing, and how big are the events getting, influence, platform, money, making a name for myself. And then as I've grown in my faith, I found myself at sometimes becoming judgmental towards the people that are not as far along on their Christian walk, or maybe even having a religious spirit at times. Jesus has a lot to say about this. Those are the world's ways, and they've creeped into the American church as well. And if you care about the epidemic of fear and anxiety that we're facing, especially with this next generation, then taking seriously how to avoid, challenge, and heal from church hurt is extremely important. We need healthy churches so we can make healthy disciples to combat the beast of fear and anxiety. In fact, my guest today has a statement at the bottom of his emails that says, healthy people, healthy churches. So today, I'm excited to start the series out with Remy Diederich. He is the author of 6 books, including Broken Trust. And I have something that's special to tell you about Broken Trust in just a second. A practical guide to recover from toxic faith, toxic church, and spiritual abuse. He's the founding pastor of Cedar Brook Church in Wisconsin, where he was simultaneously the spirituality consultant at Harbor Place Addiction Treatment Center. Currently, he continues to write, produce videos, coach individuals, and consult with churches on how to develop healthy church cultures. Remy, welcome to Fearless Tips and Talks. We're so happy to have you.
Hey, Christy, it's great to be here.
All right, so today's topic, we're going to jump right in, is understanding abuse in the church. So recently I've gone through, I've talked openly about some previous church hurt that I've had, but recently I've had to walk through another bout of just confusion, frustration, just hard things with some spiritual leaders in my life. And I felt like my trust was starting to just give way. Like I just didn't know if I could trust spiritual leaders in my life. And what do? Well, I go to Amazon and I write in something like trust broken or something like that. And your book, boom, it like appears, right? And what was interesting is you didn't have this massive abuse story that you started off with. And I think that is what drew me in right away. And there was a leader in your life that used prophecy or like a vision that he had heard from God to manipulate you. And then, the elders asked you to leave. And I'm not explaining exactly perfect, but it led you to this 5-year exile where you were like detoxing your faith. And I had a very similar situation in a counseling appointment where my counselor looked at me and he just said, Christy, I think you need to disentangle yourself from the church. And I was like, what in the world does that mean? And it started my journey. I'm reading your book, I'm reading through it, and it really, really helped me out, Remy. And so I'm just so grateful that your book was out there and God led me to it at that time. And now I get to interview you. So tell me, what is your ministry now? Tell us what you do and how you got into it.
Well, how I got into it, so I was thinking back across my whole career and how I've gotten into everything has come from left field because I never thought I was going to be a pastor. I never thought I was going to be an author. And I certainly never thought I'd be, focusing in on helping people out of spiritual abuse. So it's all kind of crazy to me. But the way it came about getting in, helping people with spiritual abuse is the church that helped me start a church in my town where I was at. They got a new pastor, and at first he was okay, but then he went off the rails theologically, and I won't bother to get into that, but it was weird stuff, and it split the church, and it was very abusive, and I didn't really know how to help them. I was just like 20 miles down the road, so I had the same website that I have now. So I started writing articles. I thought, well, maybe people can just read my blog posts and that'll help them. So I started writing really with the intention of helping people 20 miles down the road.
Wow.
And over time, as I started to look at the statistics for my website, those posts on spiritual abuse were my top posts. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea because I've written on all kinds of things on shame and anger and forgiveness. And those are the things I typically talk about. And here the spiritual abuse ones are going right to the top. And I thought, wow, maybe I should write another book, which I didn't really want to do because, as you know, books take a lot of time. And I thought, well, I'm going to go on Amazon to see if anyone's buying these books, because if no one's buying books on spiritual abuse, I don't want to write one. And at the time, this is a few years ago, no one was writing books on spiritual abuse and no one was buying books on spiritual abuse. So I thought, I'm going to write a book and no one's going to buy it. But I kept hearing back from people from the blog posts, the hurt. And I thought, just as a pastor, I just wanted to help them out of it. So I thought, I'm just going to do this. If the book doesn't sell, I'll just give it away to people who are writing me. And surprisingly, the book has done very well. And it's written a little bit different. I don't know if you noticed this, but it's written from a different angle. I think a lot of books on spiritual abuse are more clinical, more research oriented. And I took it more from a pastoral, meaning more of like I'm taking your hand and I'm walking you through this. I want people to help them to understand if they're in abuse. And then if they are, what to do about it. Do I confront the situation or do I leave the situation? What do I do? So I think it's been very helpful for people to give them very practical advice in a time that's really, they feel very alone. So anyways, I'm no longer a pastor. But that's what I do now. I write and I help people through these different issues.
Well, you've helped me tremendously with that book, and now you get
That's
to be
great.
here today, which is so awesome. And I have found too that the little bit I stick my toe out in the water and talk about the anxiety that I have felt, or the fear, or just even depression about
Mhm.
spiritual hurt, wounding, church hurt, people resonate with it. They talk about it, and it's why we're doing this series. So, why do you think there's such a rise in abusive behavior in church settings?
Well, if you think about it, I don't think abuse has gotten any worse. It's not like suddenly it's gotten worse and pastors are going crazy. I think it's been there all along. And no one's wanted to talk about it. It was just the
Mm,
thing you don't talk about. And so much of church culture, you just kind of accepted it. Like you wouldn't accept that kind of behavior at your workplace, but somehow in church it's sanctioned. It's like, well, that's just what we do. So you just kind of suck it up and you live with it. And I think maybe it started. I mean, I'm not a historian. I don't know when it started, but my guess would be when the Catholic Church started getting exposed with all their scandals, people started to speak up. And then, like dominoes, Southern Baptist and all kinds of churches now, Willow Creek, Mars Hill, people talking about spiritual abuse. It's okay now to talk about it. So now it's kind of like the Me Too movement. Women have been oppressed for centuries, but up until recently, they haven't wanted to come out and say, "Hey, I'm not going to take that anymore." And I think the same thing has happened in churches. So abuse, no, it's not on the rise, but talking about it, people now have permission to talk about it.
that's really good. So, this question has really been on my mind and my heart for a while, and what's the difference between bad leadership or maybe mistreatment and actual abuse in the church? What can you help us kind of shake the difference out there?
Yeah, well, I'm still processing that myself. So forgive me if I'm not totally articulate, but I think that's a great question because there is a distinction, but from the receiver's end, or you might say the victim's end, bad leadership and someone who's truly abusive, it might feel the same. So you might have a bad leader who's got a good heart. They just aren't emotionally intelligent. They don't know how to read a room. They don't know how to speak with tact. They don't know how to communicate. They don't get back on their emails. I mean, there's lots of what I call unforced errors that a bad leader might do. They have a good heart. They love their people. They want the best for their people, but they just don't lead well. And if you're on the receiving end of that, it can feel abusive. It can feel like, what's wrong with them? They don't like me. They're always dissing, they're ignoring me or whatever it is. On the other extreme, you might have a really good leader. I mean, good in the sense that they know how to lead meetings, they know how to preach, but their heart might be bad
Mm,
and their intentions might be bad. And their intentions aren't for the people, their intentions are totally for themselves. And as a result, they're always, they've got a scheme, they've got a plan to aggrandize themselves in some way at the expense of other people. And so, like I said, from the victim standpoint, it might both feel like abuse, but I think as God looks on the heart, there's definitely a big difference. Now, for the bad leader, they have to be careful not to use their good heart as an excuse. Like, oh, I really, I meant the best. Well, that's okay once or twice, but if that's your habit, that's not okay. You've got to either learn to develop some skills, people skills, or you need to get out of the ministry because obviously ministry is all about people. So
mm.
I don't know if that helps, but that's where I'm at with that question right now.
Well, I think just reassuring the person on the other end that bad leadership and abuse can feel the same. It can affect you it in the same way. And I think that that's important to note. But why don't you go ahead and define emotional abuse and spiritual abuse?
Okay. Well, I like to start with a generic definition for abuse, and my generic meaning that applies to all abuse, and that is that I see abuse being when one person crosses a boundary, a personal boundary of someone, to take something from them for their benefit at the expense of the other person. So with emotional abuse, I do that. I take something from you. I cross your boundaries emotionally by manipulating you, um, shaming you, uh, intimidating you, gaslighting you, all those things I can do to get something from you emotionally. I'm trying to manipulate you to do what I want you to do. And you feel something's been taken from you. You can feel that, and it hurts. That's where the abuse comes in. Spiritual
Remy,
abuse.
before
Oh,
you
go
move on to
ahead.
spiritual abuse, can I ask
Yeah,
you, when you said you're trying to take something from someone to gain something for yourself,
right.
um, I when I was walking through my first bout of spiritual abuse, I had a really hard time believing that the person was doing this with evil intent. Like I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. Are
Yeah,
there ever instances that people do things and they don't really know that they're trying to do that? Like they just, or maybe they've got brokenness inside, wounding inside
yeah.
themselves. And so they do things and there might not be an evil intent there, but it's still manipulation. It's still gaslighting.
Right.
Do you see what I'm trying to ask there?
No, totally. In fact, as I was processing this question this morning, I thought about that very thing. So what I thought of was, yeah, there's probably people who are evil in their intent. They're the sociopaths, and they actually want to inflict pain on others, which is scary to think of, but I think it's out there. I would imagine that most abusers are just, for whatever reason, like you said, it's all about them, and they see things, and maybe if you're a pastor, they see it from a spiritual dimension, like God has called me, and God wants me to do this great thing, and he knows I'm not perfect, so I'm going to make my mistakes, and I might hurt a few people here and there, but it's all for the greater good. And so they
Mm,
can justify it. I don't think they don't get up every morning and say, how can I hurt the people in my church? I would hope that's not true. um, but I think they are so, they live in a world of mirrors where everything's about them, that they have no empathy. They can't think about how their impact might hurt the other person. They assume, like, oh well, if they're helping me achieve this great thing for God, why wouldn't that make them thrilled, right?
mm.
They don't realize that it could be damaging this other person in an abusive, traumatic way.
That's good. So, well, it's not good, but it's good clarity on the thing.
Right.
So, go ahead and give us the definition of spiritual abuse then.
So spiritual abuse, I'm sure you're going to get different definitions from different people, but my definition would be the exact same thing as emotional abuse, using the same tactics, intimidation, manipulation, and so forth. But the difference is, and this is what really jacks it up as far as the power that it holds over people, is you justify your abuse with saying, "Well, God told me."
Mm,
God spoke to me. The Bible says, my interpretation is, and I've got the only right interpretation. So you have to do what I say. So emotional abuse, you might be able to say, well, they're crazy. But when they start saying God told me, it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe they're closer to God than I am. I mean, maybe God really did tell them. And it just throws you into this tizzy because you're not sure. I mean, like I had mentioned to you before we went on air that I heard your story, and it sounded like that happened to you, that you were, when your pastor started telling you all these different things, it really threw you in a tailspin because you were a brand new Christian and you didn't really know. And I think that happens a lot.
and it is so disorienting because you cannot, like, that still small voice or that discernment or that gut feeling is telling you, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. But then you have this spiritual giant in front of you who you
Yeah,
love and trust and has brought you to Jesus and has taught you so much. And you literally think, how can I challenge this person? I've
right.
not been to seminary. I don't know. And that's why it's just so damaging and painful and depressing and makes you so full of anxiety.
Yeah, yep.
In your book, you describe toxic faith and spiritual abuse as categories. And I thought this was brilliant. And you've got this really powerful quote. And you say, toxic faith is the soil from which spiritual abuse grows. Toxic
Yep.
faith is the soil from which spiritual abuse grows. And I just had to be like, hold on, I got to process this. I mean, that is just so good. So, in terms of what's the difference between toxic faith and, spiritual abuse, and the kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, well, I'm very visual, so that just helps. I also often think things through from a visual perspective, so it helps me to distinguish the two. Toxic faith being like this soil, so there's something. I don't think they're the same thing, but you can be in a toxic environment. And typically in the church, that means it's legalistic. So you've got rules all over the place. It can be a culture of fear. Typically, a toxic culture is a culture of fear. And that doesn't necessitate abuse, but if the seed is in the soil, it's probably going to produce spiritual abuse. So the toxic faith is a culture, and out of that grows actions where people say, because of all these rules, I can now apply them to you and make you feel guilty if you don't live up to the rules that I'm telling you you should follow. So does
So
that distinction help?
yes, absolutely. So you may not be an abusive church if there's toxic faith there, but the soil isn't looking good. And if that soil doesn't get changed and the fear get removed, the legalism doesn't get removed, it's on a bad growth plan, basically.
Right. Yeah, I was reading Scott McKnight's book on the Church of Tove recently, and I think he was quoting someone else, but talking about that a church culture or any culture, if you're in that culture, you will become that culture. You're a product of that culture. So if the culture is toxic, you will become a toxic person because it's going to affect your thinking. You're going to start thinking like the culture thinks. And the scary thing is you don't even know it because it starts small, and over time you just absorb that toxicity. And then you start treating other people the way you've now been treated. And it all starts to seem normal, which is, like I said, scary.
Yeah, Remy, I'm great. I'm so grateful you brought up that book. I actually just had the honor of interviewing Laura.
Oh,
Scott and Laura co-authored the book, and
great.
she's going to be on the series after Remy's
Okay.
episode. So stay tuned, Fearless Family. We've got a great series ahead of us. Okay,
Yeah.
so I was taught this analogy once about abuse. And so in the court of law, there are different degrees of penalties based
Mm-hmm.
on the crime committed. So from an abuse perspective, are there different degrees of abuse as well when we're talking about spiritual abuse or emotional abuse?
Yeah, and I think so. And I think, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but based on what we already said about bad leadership and abusive leadership, I think there can be degrees. And like I said, the extreme would be someone who actually has evil intent. So you'd want to address that in a different way than the pastor on the other extreme who just is not emotionally intelligent, and they say stupid stuff and they get in trouble and people feel hurt by it. But those are two totally different things. And this bad leader might, like I said before, might actually have a good heart. So I think you would want to address people on that continuum in different ways based on these other factors.
And I think that's so important. And I think in part two of your book, I had this aha moment where you said even good people can abuse, and you are very humble in this part. And it's kind of why I started off in the very beginning of saying, like, look, we are a part of this problem here too. If we don't realize that we've got celebrity culture going on, we've got toxic faith going on, we've got legalism going on, if we're not paying attention to those things ourselves and testing the soil ourselves and being educated ourselves, then we can go down the slippery slope very, very quickly. And you share in your book how you told someone they must do something and some content that you wrote,
Right.
and then you violated this person's or these people's right to think for themselves, and that convicted you. Can you tell us
Yeah.
that story and kind of how that all happened?
Yeah, this is years ago. I think I was in my 20s at the time, but I wrote something on how to know God's will, which I thought was important. And I shared it with an elder in the church. And he said, I really liked it, Remy, but you use the word must a lot. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, like when you've got all these steps to finding God's will, you'd say you must do this and you must do that. And I go, yeah, that's what people must do. And he just looked at me like, you don't get it. And I was like, I walked away. And in fact, I think I even told the pastor, like, man, that elder, he didn't even agree with me. I can't believe it. So I was just totally clueless to what he was saying. It was probably 15, 20 years later that the bell went off for me. And I go, oh, and like you said, I realized when you say you must do something, you're pretty much taking the right of choice away from someone else. In fact, even today, still, I'm very whenever I write a sermon or write anything, I go over it numerous times to pick up on the little things, because little things add to the culture, right? And so even now today, I find myself saying, you need, I don't say must, but I'll say you need to do this. And I'll go, no, Remy, that's kind of just a softened word for must. And so I'll often insert the word important. It's important, this trying to draw attention to something, but I want to give the person the right to make that decision if it's important for them. I don't want people to think that they have to do something because I said it. In fact, that really permeated my preaching, because I probably in my earlier days, I would say must a lot. You got to do this. And after a while, I've always been a bit of a challenger, but I would say, I'm telling you what I think. I'm telling you what I see in the Bible, but you don't answer to me. I mean, I care what you do, but I'm not going to follow you around. This is between you and God. So don't feel like you have to please me by doing these things.
Mm.
You decide what you want to do with my message today. And I think that's a spirit of freedom and generosity that really you need to look at everything as a pastor, as a church, all your sermons, all your website content, everything. You need to look at every word, because little words, especially in our Christian culture, we have these little trigger words that mean a lot more than just the one word. We have to be careful not to create a culture of expectations that people feel like, oh, if I go to that church, I guess I have to do this.
Wow. That was very powerful. And I think as spiritual leaders, whether you're a pastor, executive pastor, you're a counselor, you have any type of leadership authority in someone's lives, understanding the importance of our words and what are we planting? What culture are we
Yeah.
planting? I think that's just a very powerful way to look at it.
Yeah.
So I remember with my first experience in church hurt. I would say church hurt. I was very skittish in saying the word abuse. I didn't want, I don't know why. It just felt so, because you could look in the church and you could see all the great things that were happening. You could see all the salvations. You could see people that were still coming to know Jesus. And you saw all the good stuff that I just couldn't bring it. I couldn't say, okay, my pastor was abusive. And so, why do you think people have such a hard time with using the word abuse inside the church?
Yeah. You've added as you described that, you added a category that in my answer. So one, I would just say that for many people, it's like spiritual abuse, those words together, it's like an oxymoron. It's like, it doesn't compute. They don't know what you're talking about. A lot of people have asked me what my book Broken Trust is about. Now, the short answer is, well, it's about spiritual abuse. And they'll just kind of cock their head and go, what's spiritual abuse? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I get emails every day from people, telling me their story. And I'm just so shocked that people don't even know what spiritual abuse is. But I think it's just kind of an ignorance that it could even exist out there. So that's one thing. I think another thing is denial, that people, it's an ugly thing. Like I mentioned, the Catholic Church or the Southern Baptists or all these scandals that are out there. No one wants to admit to it. It's embarrassing. So our natural tendency is to cover it up and to deny and say, no, abuse isn't a part of this church. But kind of what you're describing is, I think, there's just this disconnect. I think we're afraid to be human. I think we're afraid to admit that the church is human. Like, we can have good things and bad things happening at the same time. No, it's either all good or it's all bad. Oh, come on, let's be honest. We make mistakes. We do some things. I think every church probably has some toxicity in it. And if you're humble enough to admit that, you can go looking for it. But if you say, oh no, we're not toxic. There's no abuse going on here. Well, then I think you might be set up for it, because you've proven that you're not open to clean out your closets.
Mm. Churches are human. I mean, and we're afraid to admit that.
Yeah.
That is true and very powerful. Okay, so we've explained we've explained the abuse part right here, but and someone might have light bulbs going out going, okay, I think I might be in the mistreatment category. I think I might be in the abuse category. I think I might be on the low end of the abuse. They're starting to think things through and they're going, man, I need to do something about this. I either need to confront the situation or I need to leave the situation.
Mhm.
And you have very, very great advice on both of those things. So if you
Yeah.
feel like you're called to leave, what should you do? If you feel like you're called to confront, what should you do?
Yeah. So yeah, and that's what when I was talking about the book being very pastoral and very practical, and I call it a practical guide that's trying to help people in those situations. So if I guess first I would recommend that people do some research on, and you did this. When I heard your story on Julie Roy's podcast, you said you had your pastor write down what he was telling you and it didn't feel right, so you took it to another pastor, I think maybe even more than one pastor, and then they told you, I think you might be in a cult. And so I think what you can do is, before you just run, you could be wrong, there's always that possibility. So if you can somehow get some outside input, go to another pastor that you respect, or I was going to say go online, but sometimes online stuff is kind of crazy. So I don't know about that. But if you can go to someone who you consider wise, consider mature in the Lord, and outside of your church, and maybe like you did, more than just one, I think that would help you discern whether or not you're in an abusive situation or not. And then if you are, the thing that I talk about in my book, and it's from my own experience, but what I did when I came out of an abusive situation, I left church for 5 years. I had no intention of leaving it for 5 years at the time. In fact, my wife and I went right back to another church, but it felt so foreign to us. It was very uncomfortable. And we went, I can't remember how long we went, for a few weeks or whatever. And I just looked at my wife and I said, I can't do this right now. Nothing, everything feels cliche. Nothing feels authentic. And I couldn't even listen to Christian music, which was really weird because I enjoyed it. And there was one artist that, it's so long ago now that no one would know who it was. It was John Michael Talbot, but he just played guitar and sang psalms, and I could listen to him, but I couldn't listen to anyone else. And I thought, this is really weird. I don't know what's happening to me. I couldn't read the Bible. I'd read the Bible, and it was the same thing. It just felt like reading the phone book. And so I really struggled with that. Every 6 months, my wife and I would try to go back, and it felt the same way. And finally, I just was praying about it, and I was reading the story of Abraham. And I thought, Abraham didn't have a Bible, and he didn't have a church, and yet he was called the father of the faith. So maybe there is a season. I'm not saying you should reject church, but maybe there's a season where if you've been in a toxic, abusive situation, where you need to detox. And that's what we do, right? I mean, if you get hurt on the football field, you don't keep playing. They pull you off the field. If you get hurt in life, you don't keep going to work, you go to a hospital. And in the same way, maybe going right back to church isn't the right thing. Or another example would be marriage. I mean, if you get a divorce, you don't turn right around and get married again. You take time away to detox and rethink and go, what was wrong with that situation, so I can re-enter as a better person than I was before. So once you decide to leave, you might need to take some time. And I've had so many people tell me that they feel so guilty taking any time off, like a week off, because it's been beat into their head that they have to go to church every week. And so when I say, well, I don't know, I took 5 years, their mind is blown. They can't imagine. They think, because they've been told that their faith is going to fall apart if they do that, and they're going to lose their salvation or some crazy thing. And it's like, well, I can't, there's no rule about this. It was 5 years for me. It might be 5 weeks for you. I don't know. It might be 10 years. I don't know. But I think you need to take the time you need to take to detoxify. So when you come back to the church, you're healthy. So that's, I mean, like you said, I gave a lot of examples in the book, but those are my initial thoughts about what to do if you're going to leave the church.
What if you need to confront? What do you do then?
That's tougher. And in general, I would say you're probably not the person to confront. And what I mean by that is, your pastors and your leaders, they're loaded for bear, and they might very easily chew you up and spit you out. And then you're going to get way more hurt than if you would have just left. And I've seen that in so many people. And it's like, oh my gosh, if they just would have left, that was one degree of hurt. But they challenged these people who just chewed them up and spit them out, and now they're just devastated. And some of them they give up on God. Like, why would a pastor treat me that way? And so you could confront. I would say the only people I would recommend confront would be someone who is maybe in leadership in the church that has a voice, or you have some respect, some authority that will be respected. But other than that, I wouldn't venture into it. And the other thing you might want to do is contact the denomination or overseers of the church and just say, hey, I'm on my way out, but this is what's going on. I thought you should know, and maybe you can do something about it. That's a possible way. I did that in my abusive situation, and they just wrote me back and said, too bad, so sad. You got to agree with the leader, your pastor, or leave. And I went, okay, well, then I guess I'm going to leave.
Which just confirms your point that you had a voice in that setting and they still didn't do anything about it. And so now I'm like having this visual of the healthy culture that you're talking about. If it's an unhealthy culture and there's toxic faith and abuse and all these things going on, then your healthy seed coming in trying to fix these years of unhealthiness isn't going to do anything. And it's partly why it's so important that you and I have conversations for church goers to hear things like this so that they can be aware and be prepared and know what is toxic and what's not toxic, and be ready to either leave or confront if God's calling you to. And Remy, I look at, my situation, and we did choose to confront, and it did not go well, and more pain and more suffering came out of it. And now, will God use it all? Absolutely. But man, my heart was mangled and broken up, and like you said, chewed me up and spit me out kind of thing. And then there was retaliation, and then there was talking behind our backs, and it was ugly. So you know, you're told Matthew 18, go to the people that have hurt you. And in these situations, it might be wise not to throw your pearls before swine. And maybe you don't go and confront. And I've not heard that advice, but you do walk that out in your book beautifully.
Yeah, I think you have to, again, it's a question that you have to wrestle with God, because I don't doubt that maybe you were called to confront, and getting chewed up and spit out might have been part of the plan. I mean, Jesus got nailed to a cross. So sometimes God calls us to do hard things, but I wouldn't assume that. I think some people think, with our optimistic eye, like, oh, I'm sure they would never have bad intent, and I'm just going to go in and they'll see it my way and everything will be different. No, it won't. And I think that's where people need to understand the power of culture, because culture is embedded and into the life of the church, and it's not just one thing. Like there might be one thing upsetting you about the church, but it's probably like an octopus. The tentacles go throughout the church in many ways, and you're not going to be able to cut off those legs.
Hey friends, I just wanted to take a moment to interrupt to let you know that the Fearless Tips and Talks podcast is part of a ministry called Fearless Unite. Our mission is to help you find freedom from fear and anxiety in a world that feeds it. We are rolling out a new initiative called Soul Shepherd, which is a mental health advocacy movement in our community. We are very serious about decreasing the mental health crisis that we are facing. And we're going to do this first by starting with teenage girls, one body, soul, and spirit at a time. If you want to learn more about our Soul Shepherd initiative, go to fearlessunite.com/Soul Shepherd. This will also be linked in our show notes. Now, back to the interview. You mentioned at the top of this podcast, oppression to women. And that has been part of my story, Remy. I am a challenger by nature. And I found at the top of our podcast, before we hit record, that you are an Enneagram 8 and I'm an Enneagram 8.
Right.
And I have vision and dreams. And I feel like God has gifted me to lead and teach and shepherd people. And that word oppression is a strong word that you said. And The definition of that word is an unjust, prolonged treatment. And so my recent pain around church wounding has been over the debate of women in ministry. And my personal conviction is that women have been unjustly treated. They've been held back and they've been not allowed to be free to do their giftings and their talents in church settings based on some misrepresentations on several key passages in scripture. So, how would you? Women aren't the only people that have felt oppressed, but how would you advise someone feeling oppressed or held back or not feeling like they can use their giftings in a church setting?
Well, it's an interesting thought to think that people in a church would feel oppressed and held back, isn't it? I mean, just a church culture should be generous. And so the thought that anyone would feel oppressed and held back is really sad to me. So even hearing your story, I mean, you're such a powerful person. And if you were in my church, I would go, oh man, how can I send money her way? How can I give people to her? What can I do to make her flourish? And to think that you were being crushed and pulled under someone else's authority is just so sad to me. So I just want to say that I'm with you on this whole idea of not oppressing women and giving people freedom. But if people feel they're in that situation, I think you need to go to the top. And again, that it's not always an easy thing to do, but I think you need to find out what the view of the church really is. I think many people attend a church where women, theologically, women are subservient, and they may have never thought about that. And I've asked, women, female friends, I go, that church that you're going to, they don't support women in ministry. Why do you go that? And they go, oh, well, I guess I really haven't thought about it. It's like, well, I think you should. I think you should think about it because, it might not affect you like in a church of 1,000. I never thought I would be, I'm not going to be a pastor here, so it really doesn't matter. But I think it does matter. It goes back to that idea of culture. It's worked and baked into the culture that women somehow are not given the esteem that they should have. And so I think you need to find out what the thought is. And then you have to decide, I guess, if you want to live in that kind of a context, that kind of a culture, if they don't support women. I don't think you're challenging them is going to change anything because, like I said, it's a theological bent. And so they're not going to change their theology just because you came in and talked to them about it. And then I personally, I'm just talking about personally what I would do. I would have to look for another church. We just moved to Minneapolis from Wisconsin and had to look for a church. I hadn't looked for a church in 25, 30 years. And first thing I did is just go to websites and look at the staff page and the elder page and see if there's any women on it, because I don't want to go to a church that only hears from half the population. I want the full complement of both men and women speaking into my life and leading the church. And so if it's all men, I click and go to the next church.
And as a man, Remy, you truly feel that way. You really did go and look to see if there were women on there because that matters to you that much.
Oh, yeah, it matters a lot. I was like one of the people that I just described, not really thinking about it years ago, probably 25 years ago. And then I was in a seminary class and I was asked, we broke into small groups, and I was asked to think how I would feel as the opposite gender in my church. And it hit me between the eyes because as eights, you know what an eight personality is like. We have lots of opinions and we'd like to be heard and we have vision. And I was always offering my opinion and vision in our church. And I thought, if I was a female, I think they would kick me out or shut me down or something. I don't think I could go to my church. And that just put me in a tailspin theologically because I had never really thought about that before. So from that time on, I changed everything about my thinking, and we left that denomination. And when I started a church, I was a part of a denomination that believed in women in ministry, but they didn't live it out. And so when I would go to pastor meetings, it was all men. And then we hired a female pastor, and I brought her to that pastor's meeting, and it felt really weird because she was the only woman. And people just assumed that she was my wife. And it's like, no, she's not my wife. But after that, we thought, we need to find a denomination where they really support women in ministry. So then we moved again. Our church changed denominations, and we joined the Evangelical Covenant Church because they are very supportive of women in ministry. And so, yeah, half of our elders in our church were women. We make a point that there was always 9, so it was either 4 or 5, but they were at least 4. And then, I was the main teaching pastor on Sundays, but I would purposefully rotate women in just so people got a different perspective. So yes, it's very important to me, and it's a priority. I don't minimize that in any way.
As much as I appreciate you encouraging me at the beginning of this question, I just want to encourage you, because to hear a man of God champion and empower women, and having a daughter myself who I don't want to see her have to fight these same battles, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for doing that, because the amount of anxiety and just depression I have felt about not being able to use my voice the way that God has gifted me. And I want to just put a little clarifier. When we say women in ministry, we don't mean that there are tons of churches that have women's ministries where women can lead women, and that can be a very beautiful thing. I've run a female ministry for a very long time, but what we're talking about is empowering and championing women to use their spiritual gifting of teaching, pastoring, leading inside the church. So you see women at the highest level of leadership. You see women on a Sunday morning sharing and teaching. You see women utilizing their gifts the same way that men are using their gifts from a leadership perspective. So that's what we mean about women in ministry. Remy, I'm so grateful for your perspective on all that. My last little question here is, there are, I'm sure as you fought for women and you empowered women, you got pushback about the limiting passages about women and not being able to have authority over men, and then putting them in places of eldership or allowing them to speak on a Sunday morning. I'm sure that there were some heated conversations about that. So how do you know when to fight for your convictions, and then just how do you about scripture? Because here's the thing, most of my brothers and sisters in Christ that believe that women can't do this, can't be leaders, can't teach in the church, can't, become pastors, they believe with their whole hearts that scripture say, no, this is no, this is a no. And so
Right.
it's hard to challenge when you're fighting over the fact that you want to make sure that you're abiding by what scripture says. So
Yeah.
what's your advice in those situations?
Well, I don't, that's a tough one. And I don't think that's something you can fight for. And it's not something that I don't think you're going to win that argument for the reasons that you said. They're convinced. And I've never, I think I put together some pretty good sermons and pretty good arguments, but it doesn't always convince people. And so, especially on hot topics, I just don't go there anymore. I don't try to fight it. And I think one of the best things that you can do, and research will actually back this up, I've read about this, but when you come in contact with someone who's really thinking different than you, rather than try to convince them what you believe, the best thing to do is just ask them more about what they believe. Like, really, just be curious. Like, really, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. How did you come to that decision? What were the factors in your life that made you reach that decision? And how is that playing? Just keep asking questions and asking questions. And a lot of times what will happen in that situation, people will hear themselves speak out loud, or they won't hear themselves. They're like, I don't really know. I mean, I've had the answer, but I haven't had the reasoning. And so when you ask them for reasoning and they can't offer it, they feel convicted about that. So
Hmm.
if you want someone to change their mind, that's the best way to help them change their mind, is get them talking about why they believe what they believe. But as far as fighting over things like that, it's just like, you be you. I can't. I'm not going to change that. The thing that really helped me, uh, there was a number of things, but I remember I was in a Bible study once with other leaders, and I was at a Lutheran church, and there was a woman there. She wasn't a pastor, but she was kind of like a lay pastor. And of all of the pastors in that room, she was the most insightful. She, uh, I considered her the most spiritual, and I learned so much from her. And I thought, wait a minute, and this was before I had made the big change. I thought, if women aren't supposed to be leaders, if women aren't supposed to teach men, how come I'm learning so much from this woman? And I think that's what's got to happen for other men or who hold this position. You just pray for them, and maybe they'll have the same experience that I had. They'll come under the teaching of, by mistake, they probably didn't plan on it, but by mistake, they come under a teaching of a woman and they go, oh my gosh, that makes me really think. I got a lot, God really spoke to me through that woman. The woman that we had on staff at the time at my church, she was a very powerful leader. And I know she persuaded a lot of people in our church to convert to believing that women should be in ministry, because up until that time, they just hadn't seen any women in ministry. And here she comes on the scene, and she was a great preacher. And as a result, people thought, oh, I can follow her as a pastor. And so that just made me really happy. So I think you have to experience a good leaders who are female. And I think you're a great example. That's why I'm excited to meet you, because you come across as a strong leader, and I'm excited for how you impact people. And I'm sure other men will see that and they'll go, oh, I could listen to her. I could follow her.
Thank you, Remy. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I want people to be able to get a hold of you. If anything we've said today resonates, maybe there's a church leader that's listening, and you don't even have to be a church leader, right? Like can you coach people that are walking through, church hurt or church wounding, church anxiety as well? Or is it specifically just to church leaders?
No, I work with both. And you can go to my website. It's just Reading Remy. So reading like you're reading a book, readingremy.com. And I've got my books listed there, and I've got my coaching options there for pastors or for individuals.
That's fantastic. And I will link all of that in the show notes, and I will put a special link to Broken Trust because I highly recommend it. It was a beautiful read for me. It was a healing read for me. It was an informative read for me. And I'm so grateful that I found it. I'm grateful that I found you too, Remy. Would you pray for our listeners and watchers? We've got watchers too that
Sure.
are feeling broken in some way, shape, or form by church hurt right now.
Yeah, I'll do that. God, thank you so much for Christy. Thank you for her addressing this whole big topic of fear, because it's in the church and it shouldn't be there. God, we want a spirit of love to pervade your church, and a spirit of generosity. And so many people have been hurt with the toxic faith and the spiritual abuse, and they're in a tailspin and they don't know what to do with it. They want to be faithful to you, and it seems like the only way they can do that is through their church, and that's not working out. So there's just so much confusion. So I pray, God, through this series that Christy is doing, that you really help people sort things out, and at the end of it, they'll have a greater sense of where they need to go. And if any of my words or my book or anything can help them, God, might you expand it in their hearts so they can get the freedom that I know you want for them. Thank you so much, God, for this time right now. And I pray that you would expand this ministry of Christy's to reach many people, that they would find the freedom that we're all looking for. And I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. If you found this to be helpful, will you help us get the word out about this podcast? I would be so honored if you would share it with your loved ones, rate it, review it, and also be sure to subscribe. And lastly, and I really mean this, we want to hear from you. If you have suggestions or ideas on something that I should cover or a tip that you'd really like help on, please send us an email, podcast@fearlessunite.com. Again, that's podcast@fearlessunite.com. Thank you so much for listening.